Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Leah a program manager at the Takshashila Institution, and today we're talking about one of the most critical parts of India's education system, how we train and support teachers in government schools. I'm joined by my colleague Astha.
Thank you, Leah. Great to be here. I am also program manager with Takshashila Institution, and we are discussing things about education. Everyone wants better learning outcomes, but we need to ask the deeper question: are we really investing in the people who make learning happen? Our teachers.
Yeah, teacher training has been on the policy agenda for decades, from the 1986 National Policy on Education to the NEP, the New Education Policy in 2020. But the outcomes still vary widely across states. So today we look into what's working, what isn't, and more importantly, what policy can do better to strengthen teacher training in India. So, India has close to 10 million teachers, and a huge majority work in government schools. The system that supports their training is enormous and uneven. As per the recommendations of the new education policy in 2020, every teacher and head teacher is expected to participate in at least 50 hours of continuous professional development, which is CPD, those kind of opportunities every year for their own professional development, which is driven by their own interests. And it will systematically cover the latest pedagogies regarding foundational literacy and numeracy, formative and adaptive assessment of learning outcomes, competency based learning, and related pedagogies such as experiential learning, arts integrated, sports integrated, storytelling based approaches, etc. The framework was well intentioned. So, the 1986 education policy set up the District Institutes of Education and Training, or DIETs, to decentralize teacher training. And the idea was that every district would have a local institute to train new teachers and upgrade the skills of existing ones. But over time, that system kind of lost steam and they became underfunded, understaffed, disconnected from the classroom realities. And so this has led to a patchwork of training quality. Some states like Karnataka, Delhi, and Himachal Pradesh, they have re-energized their teaching training systems, but others still struggle to get the basics right. And what is striking is that a lot of in-service training tends to be short-term, lecture-based, and it's not really about pedagogy or problem solving.
So the issue isn't that we lack institutions or frameworks, it's the policy architecture exists but it isn't delivering, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge is to rebuild these institutions so they can actually function as centers of professional learning and not just bureaucratic outposts.
Yeah. So we could look into why, what are the main reasons this system hasn't really worked as it was intended. It seems that teacher training in India is still really event based, more of like a workshop or a one off refresher course rather than a process of continuous professional growth. And there's often the top down approach as well. Teachers are told what to do, but their training and the realities of their classrooms don't really match. So the realities don't really shape the content of training, and there's no sustained follow up or mentoring. I do know that there are members of the local corporations that do come into classrooms to evaluate what's going on, but I don't think that there is much mentorship that does take place. And I've heard from, I've seen teachers when I was doing the Teach for India fellowship myself. I've seen that when they're sent for training, they just fill attendance sheets, they sit through presentations, but hardly any of it actually affects what they do differently in the classroom in terms of learning outcomes or even setting classroom culture, things like that.
So what I have also seen is that there is a will to learn amongst teachers,
Yeah.
but the system that is currently in place, it does not reward them in any way. So for
Yeah.
example, if they want to incorporate something they have learned in real life or in sessions, there is absolutely no reward for these teachers to implement any new way of learning for the students they really care about. So basically what happens is there is no linkage between training, recognition, or even for that matter career progression these teachers might want to seek in the future.
Yeah. So current policy approach kind of treats training, and the teachers end up also teaching their training as more of an obligation and less than an opportunity. It's a good way for them to get a stable job that pays well, and but it's, yeah, again, seen as an obligation and not really an opportunity for them to advance their careers or to grow professionally.
Absolutely. So that's where the policy lens becomes very critical, because we need to move from training as compliance to training as professional development.
Yeah, yeah. So there are actually examples across various states in India that have tried new models. One and a few that actually work. So there's the Delhi Mentor Teaching Program, and it's great for a great model for peer learning. So experienced teachers mentor a group of others. They visit classrooms and provide feedback. So it's collaborative, it's ongoing, and it's not just this one-off session. Yeah. Do you know of any others?
Yeah, so there is one in Karnataka which is Nali Kali, or Joyful Learning, which is focused on activity based learning for young children. And the training which is conducted for teacher is more hands on and is built around real classroom examples, and it has helped in improving the engagement, especially for the first generation learners.
Yeah, yeah. And we're also seeing an integration of digital tools like Diksha and Nishtha that allow teachers to access training materials and courses in their own language at their own pace. But it's not the key is not just to rely on digital platforms alone, of course, because a lot of classrooms in India are not digitized, and don't have access to computers. So the successful models combine online learning with in-person mentoring for teacher training, and of course community based reflection. And an example of this also is a project in Madhya Pradesh called CM Rise, the CM Rise program, which blends the digital courses with classroom observation and rewards professional growth. So what we're seeing is that the states are experimenting, and many of these innovations are policy experiments, and they could work actually if they're scaled up systematically.
So, in my experience, yes, they are small but very powerful proof points that policy conversations need to shift from designing one size fits all training to build an ecosystem of continuous support and learning for the teachers who are actually delivering this knowledge or this information to the students they're working with in the classroom.
Yeah. So if we had to outline what India could do differently from a policy perspective, what would we focus on?
I'd start with rebuilding stronger institutions. Diets and SCRTs are the foundation, and they need to be reimagined. With institutions having real autonomy, funding, and high quality faculty, they should be learning hubs and not just functioning merely as administrative offices, because when they have autonomy, then they're able to make better decisions which is relevant to their context, instead of them being like they having a laid down policy framework that this is what will fit your state, your city, or a block level education institution.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just about also adding more programs. We also need to move on from need to move on from event based learning to continuous professional development, which is what I referred to earlier, the CPD. And the NEP actually calls for 50 hours of continuous professional development every year, but it has to be meaningful because it has to be linked to, like you said, cater to their individual, the school's situation. So linked to the teachers' work plans, and it should be tracked as part of their professional records. So there is growth in their professional development. And this kind of ties into mentorship as well.
Right. So policy needs to create a formal mentorship and a peer learning system because collaborative learning places are the best places to learn in, especially in education scenario. Every teacher should have access to a mentor or a learning circle. The government could build a national mentorship framework where experienced teachers are recognized and supported to guide others. It's how you turn training from a passive experience into a more professional, community driven learning experience.
Yeah. So, if I could just interrupt here. So, actually, in Teach for India, this structure internally is such that you have different teachers placed in different schools across the city. And depending on, area wise, you're grouped into learning circles and a similar learning circle that you mentioned. So, we meet on a monthly basis or every 2-3 months, and we have discussions about what we're doing differently in our classrooms, what's working and what isn't, what have our reading levels improved, has our numeracy improved in our classrooms. It's a way for everyone to learn from each other and see what other fellows are doing creatively. It could be with classroom culture, it could be about setting how they set expectations, a call to actions to help get attention, or how you divide the group of the classroom, because often you don't have anything less than 45 kids in a class. So how would you divide them based on their reading levels, and how would they help each other? How does one person tackle teaching an entire classroom of different reading levels and different age groups as well? So this is, I can definitely say, is a helpful technique to have, where there's peer learning, you learn from each other in a learning circle, and you meet regularly so you can implement new things. And it also helps in terms of morale, with when as a teacher you might feel like maybe you're not doing as great, but then seeing others doing things differently, you kind of get a boost into it, kind of injects itself into how you then take your class forward, because it's inspiring seeing other teachers doing things so creatively, and it gives you ideas of how you can do things, and you can even ask them for help, at least in the Teach for India, the fellow space. So
Right.
yeah.
So I also would want to bring in my experience where I started off my career as an education specialist with an organization, and my role was to train the teachers, where essentially there were certain modules again from Teach for India. We took these modules, implemented with teachers, and after we would conduct these sessions, I would sit in these classes and give these teachers feedback of how their class was, how receptive the students were. So this kind of helped me learn their style of teaching also, and also give them feedback on what they can add in the class.
Yeah.
So in addition to this, then alongside policy should link professional development to a career progression as well, which is what makes it more important and more relevant for teachers as well, because teaching, again, it's a thing that everyone does it out of passion, but it's also very important that you grow professionally as well. So there should be an incentive of both learning and both giving in the space itself. So teachers who complete meaningful training or take on mentoring roles should see that that is reflected in their promotions, responsibilities, and recognition.
Yeah. And so we need like a competency based career pathway and not a seniority based advancement.
Absolutely. I think every profession needs that. I mean, the hierarchy shouldn't be based on number of years you have experience in a sector, but it should be your competency and how you are good in terms of skills, basically. So that's what the National Professional Standards for Teacher (NPST) is supposed to do: set clear expectation and link them to growth. But it will only work if states use it constructively as a framework for improvement and not for controlling these environments.
Yeah. And so there's also the question of accountability. Like, we're putting all these things in place, how do we know if the training's actually working? So
so that's a major gap, right? So policy should encourage evidence-based decision making. Every large-scale training program, whether it's Nishtha or state-led initiatives, should be independently evaluated. We need data on whether teachers are using what they learn and how it affects students' outcomes.
Yeah. And at the governance level, do you think funding could also be the issue?
Possibly. I mean, there is always an issue related to funds. Teacher professional development deserves dedicated funding to itself. And that funding should be flexible, allowing innovation and partnership with NGOs, universities, or edtech platforms that can add more value to this ecosystem. Yeah.
So the system actually needs both a structural reform and a cultural reform to make better institutions, and also um, building greater respect for teachers.
Absolutely, yes.
So if we could sum this up, I think the way forward, I mean, it's still complicated. Every state comes with a whole onslaught of different situations. So it's difficult to just put down one thing, put a one size fits all solution. But for one, I think we could rebuild our teacher training institutions, like making diets and certs, SCERTS is what I mean, strong, well staffed. The second would probably to be to institutionalize continuous professional development and mentorship such that it happens regularly. And we could also think of linking training to career progression and professional recognition. And lastly, we could also ensure accountability through data and evidence. Now, I know, as I mentioned before, from the experience that I had of working in a government school, you had representatives from the local corporation coming to observe classrooms to see how they're doing and things like that. But it then became about, or my observation was that it then became about having, inflating your attendance records, or the grades that your classroom was
Right.
achieving, right? Because it seems to be this thing about my local schools are doing, I mean, in one area is doing better than maybe another. It's very competitive that way. So if it comes down to fudging the grades or fudging the attendance, because there's also the issue of kids dropping out of school early.
Right.
So if it's about that, then I mean, like, if they're dropping out of school or if the grades aren't that great, then the attendance records and grades are fudged so that the school looks better, because it could mean a change of personnel in the school if things don't look as good as maybe other schools, or not as good as what they want it to seem like. Yeah, so that's why I would say ensuring accountability through the data and evidence could be tricky.
So I would like to add one more point to what you just added about data.
Yeah.
So data evidence that is based entirely on quantitative data could be very, very misleading. You need to have qualitative along with the quantitative data.
Yeah.
So, like you said, fudging of data can only solve problems for the short term.
Yes.
If you think of it, over the years, whoever is trying to not get the school in bad light would eventually have a bigger load to deal with.
Yes.
The learning outcomes, the number of dropouts, both like boys and girls, would eventually be like, so the data was fudged, and now after 3 years of proper evaluation, you see the numbers are very different.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it will lead to that, like bursting out of that data will burst, and then you will see that the school wasn't really performing, and all this data that was fudged 2 years was wrong.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, what matters most is, one is what data you are collecting, and what qualitative indicators you are accepting as important data for your research or for your understanding of that report.
Yeah.
That would entail a lot of other things than just like learning outcomes, dropout rates, also like the teachers you are working with, because in these schools, most of the teachers are contract teachers. That's another thing to talk about.
Yeah.
So when we get into these nitty-gritties, data also becomes more murkier, more tricky to think and to see that what are we collecting, what questions are we asking from that data.
Yeah. I do also think that it's important, slight segue, but I do also think that it's important that a single teacher stays with a group of kids in a single classroom over multiple years. Because at the end of the day, or at least one class teacher,
Right.
who works continuously with those
With the
kids,
students.
because they know the kids at the personal level, they build relationships with the teacher, so they know what's going on at home. That way you're supporting the child in a holistic way throughout their years in school, rather than because also, again, this is just based on my experience, but it's difficult building relationships with kids. It's not so easy, especially if they're coming from a difficult community or they aren't supported at home. So teacher training needs to account for that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes sense. So yes, and underlying all that is a shift of mindset. We need to treat teachers as someone who propel learning and not as someone who just handles like administrative work for the school.
Yeah.
There has to be, so these teachers have to have more autonomy, more say in what they want for their students,
Yeah.
than just like running errands. Oh, this is an event, so let's, come together and conduct this event, do this workshop, or like have some kind of interventions with their students. So, like you said, if there is a class teacher, there are many touch points personally with these students, and this teacher should have more autonomy over what they want to do in their class.
Yeah. And again, that incentive to want to be a part of, to do things differently in a classroom will also come with the benefits of the continuous professional development system.
Yes.
So if this policy is done right, we could have proper curriculum reform, foundational literacy, digital learning, which has become a very important thing, especially with the coming of AI. All this becomes easier to achieve if we can implement these policies, because they could actually be really helpful.
Yes.
And every reform ultimately depends on the teacher in the classroom.
Yes.
So whether if they can invest in their professional development, it's the most effective policy decision that the education system can make.
Yes.
And thank you so much for this insightful discussion. And I'm sure that we can both agree that it's clear that the teacher training challenge isn't really about content or technology. It's about building a supportive ecosystem through thoughtful policy design.
Absolutely, Leah. Policy has to focus on capacity, continuity, and community. If we empower teachers, we strengthen the entire system. So that should be a way to go.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to our listeners. Thanks for tuning in to All Things Policy, and tune in to the next episode. Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.